Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. We love to take these complex topics that are swirling around online and really break them down so you can impress your friends and family at your next gathering. And today we're diving into the world of tariffs, specifically all the buzz surrounding Donald Trump's proposed tariffs. So much talk online about these.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It seems like everyone's got an opinion, and they're
Yeah,
not afraid to share it.
exactly. And our mission today is to help you cut through the noise. By the end of this deep dive, you'll understand not only what these tariffs are, but what they could mean for you, your wallet, and the global economy.
What's really interesting is that these online discussions go way beyond just the economics.
Yeah.
We're seeing debates about everything from inflation and job security to the future of U.S. relationships with its allies.
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding what Trump's actually proposing. So let's break down this tariff plan. What's he actually suggesting?
Well, he's suggesting a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Mexico and Canada, plus an additional 10% on Chinese goods. His stated goal with these tariffs is to curb illegal migration and drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl, which is a huge problem right now.
And he's been pretty adamant about wanting to implement these tariffs right away on day one if he gets back in office. But there's a potential conflict here, right? These tariffs could clash with the USMCA trade agreement, which he himself signed.
Yeah, that's a big point of tension. The USMCA, remember, is all about promoting free trade between the US, Mexico, and Canada. So adding these tariffs would really strain those relationships.
It's pretty ironic when you think about it because Trump once called tariff his favorite word in the dictionary. He's clearly a fan. But how exactly do tariffs work? For those of us who aren't economists, can you explain what happens when a tariff is imposed?
Sure, a tariff is basically a tax on imported goods. So let's say we have a car being imported from Mexico. When that car arrives in the US, the importing company has to pay an extra 25% of that car's value to the US government.
So is it Mexico paying the tariff or is
Yeah.
it someone else?
It's not Mexico directly, it's the importing company. And that added cost often gets passed on to the consumer in the form of a higher price tag for that car.
So ultimately, it's the American consumer who ends up footing the bill.
Yeah.
But how much do these tariffs actually affect the prices we see in the store? Are we talking about a few cents here and there, or is it more noticeable than that?
It can be pretty substantial, actually. For example, after Trump imposed tariffs during his first term, the price of washing machines in the U.S. went up by 12%.
Wow, 12%.
Now imagine that same effect across a whole range of goods, from cars and electronics to everyday items like food and clothing.
Yeah, 12% increase is definitely something you'd notice, especially for families who are already stretching their budgets. Which brings us to the bigger picture. How could these tariffs affect the entire U.S. economy?
Well, economists generally agree that tariffs can contribute to inflation, meaning the prices of goods and services across the board start rising. We're even seeing forecasts from institutions like Deutsche Bank that are predicting U.S. inflation to climb above the Federal Reserve's target because of these tariffs.
So we're looking at a scenario where everything could get more expensive for everyone. But are there certain parts of the economy that might be hit harder than others?
Absolutely. Sectors that rely heavily on imports from those targeted countries, China, Mexico, and Canada, would feel it the most. Think about the auto industry, for example. Many car parts come from these countries. So tariffs on those parts would make cars much more expensive to manufacture in the U.S. And guess who ultimately pays for that?
The consumer again.
Exactly.
It sounds like this could turn into a domino effect where one industry after another is impacted and everyone's wallet takes a hit.
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern. And to put some numbers on it, the Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated that Trump's previously proposed tariffs could cost the average U.S. household over $2,600 per year.
Wow, that's a lot of money. And speaking of impacts, let's shift gears and talk about the potential impact on U.S. allies. How are countries like Canada and Mexico reacting to these proposed tariffs?
They're not thrilled about it, to say the least. Both countries have voiced serious concerns and are predicting some pretty significant damage to their own economies.
And I imagine they're not just going to sit back and do nothing, right?
Right. They've already hinted at imposing retaliatory tariffs, so they'll raise tariffs on U.S. goods coming into their countries.
So it's a bit of a,
It's a tit for tat.
yeah, a standoff where everyone could end up losing in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And we're already seeing some immediate reactions in the financial markets. The Canadian dollar took a hit after Trump's announcement, didn't it?
It did. It actually fell to a 4-year low, which reflects the level of anxiety in these countries about what could happen to their economies.
Yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern. But amid all this talk about tariffs, we have to consider the argument that Trump is making in their favor, the trade deficit. He's often talked about how other countries are taking advantage of the U.S. through trade. Is that really the case? Do tariffs actually help reduce trade deficits?
Well, it's complicated. There's definitely a counter-argument to Trump's claim. Many economists believe that tariffs often fail to reduce trade deficits and can even make them worse because they make U.S. exports less competitive in the global market.
So it's not as simple as saying tariffs equal smaller trade deficit.
Right. And we actually have evidence from Trump's first term. Despite implementing tariffs, the U.S. trade deficit actually grew during his presidency.
That's interesting. So these tariffs might not even achieve their intended goal. But let's move beyond just the economics for a moment and talk about the human side of this issue. How are people reacting to this news about the tariffs?
Public opinion seems to be divided. Some people are very supportive of tariffs. They believe they're necessary to protect American jobs and industries. They argue that globalization has led to job losses and unfair competition.
So they see tariffs as a way to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and level the playing field.
Exactly. But on the other hand, many others are concerned about the potential for inflation job losses in other sectors and the overall risk of a trade war.
They probably see tariffs as ultimately harmful to the U.S. economy and believe there are better ways to address these issues. And I imagine there's also some concern about how this could impact Trump politically, especially if these tariffs lead to significant price increases for consumers.
Absolutely. There could definitely be some political backlash. A recent poll actually found that 69% of Americans believe tariffs will make the things they buy more expensive.
That's a pretty substantial majority. So if tariffs aren't necessarily the best solution, what are some of the alternatives?
Well, there are other ways to approach the concerns that are driving Trump's tariff policy. Instead of resorting to tariffs, the U.S. could focus on investing in domestic innovation and research and development. This would make U.S. companies more competitive on a global scale.
This sounds like a more long-term strategy, though.
It is, but it could be more sustainable and effective in the long run. Another approach is to address the root causes of issues like illegal migration and drug trafficking through diplomacy and targeted interventions. For example, the Biden administration has been urging China to crack down on the production of fentanyl ingredients.
So rather than just reacting with tariffs, maybe tackling those underlying problems could be a more effective approach.
That's the argument a lot of experts are making. It's about addressing the cause, not just the symptom.
Right. We've covered a lot of ground already in this deep dive, from breaking down Trump's tariff plan to understanding the mechanics of tariffs and exploring the potential economic and political fallout. We've even considered the arguments for and against tariffs and touched upon some alternative solutions.
And through it all, we've tried to keep you, the listener, in mind, because at the end of the day, these policies affect all of us.
Exactly. And before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. In a globalized world like ours, are tariffs really a viable solution to complex economic and political challenges? We'll delve deeper into that in part 2, so stay tuned.
It's interesting when you look back at the history of tariffs. You know, they were once a primary source of revenue for governments.
Oh, yeah.
But their role has really shifted over time.
That's true. And today, with the global economy so interconnected, it makes you wonder if tariffs can really achieve what Trump is hoping for.
That's a million-dollar question, isn't it? Some argue that tariffs can be effective in specific situations, like protecting a brand new industry or addressing unfair trade practices.
Right. Like when a foreign government is subsidizing their exports to undercut American companies.
Exactly. But using tariffs as a broad solution for more complex issues like illegal immigration or drug trafficking, that's much more controversial.
It does seem like a lot of economists believe that those problems require more targeted solutions, like diplomatic efforts or specific interventions, rather than just slapping tariffs on everything.
Right. And it's crucial to remember that tariffs can often have unintended consequences.
Like those retaliatory tariffs we were talking about.
Huh?
A trade war could really hurt everyone involved.
Exactly. And even if tariffs do lead to some job creation in the U.S., those gains could be offset by higher prices for consumers and less competitive U.S. exports.
So it's a delicate balancing act with a lot of potential downsides. And what about the impact on consumer behavior? If these tariffs make certain products more expensive or even harder to find, won't consumers start changing their buying habits?
Absolutely. They might opt for cheaper alternatives even if the quality isn't as good.
Right.
Or they might delay purchases altogether, which could have a ripple effect on the entire economy.
It really makes you think. And what about innovation?
Yeah.
If U.S. companies become complacent because they're shielded from foreign competition, wouldn't that stifle innovation?
That's a valid point. Without that pressure to compete on a global level, U.S. companies might have less incentive to invest in research and development or to improve their products. Imagine a world where your smartphone is stuck with the same old technology because there's no competition pushing for something better.
It's like hitting the pause button on progress. So, while tariffs might seem like a quick fix on the surface,
Hmm.
they could actually harm the U.S. economy in the long run.
And potentially damage relationships with key allies.
Now, let's bring this back to the online discussions we've been analyzing. What are some of the main arguments people are making for and against these tariffs?
We're seeing a wide spectrum of opinions. Some people are staunchly in favor of tariffs. They see them as essential for protecting American jobs and industries.
Because they feel like globalization has led to job losses and unfair competition.
Exactly. They want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. and level the playing field. But then you have others who are worried about the potential for inflation, job losses in other sectors, and the risk of a trade war. They believe that focusing on domestic innovation and addressing the root causes is a more sustainable approach.
So it's a complex issue with valid points being raised on both sides.
It is. And it's important to remember that public opinion on tariffs can be influenced by a lot of factors, like political affiliation, economic background, personal experiences. So you're not going to find a simple one-size-fits-all answer.
Right. It's not a black and white issue.
Yeah.
It's nuanced, and the impact of tariffs can vary greatly depending on the specific circumstances and how they're implemented.
Exactly.
Okay, we've explored some of the complexities surrounding tariffs and trade, but how does all of this relate back to the average listener? How might these tariffs actually impact their daily lives?
Well, if these tariffs go into effect, it's very likely that consumers will see higher prices for a wide range of goods, everything from groceries and clothing to cars and electronics.
And those price increases could really put a strain on people's budgets, leaving them with less disposable income.
Exactly. It's not just about consumer goods either. Higher costs for businesses could lead to job losses in certain sectors.
So even if you don't directly import goods yourself, you could still feel the impact through higher prices or even job insecurity. It's a ripple effect.
Absolutely. And it just highlights how economic policies can have a significant impact on everyone, even those who aren't directly involved in international trade.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, and it underscores the importance of staying informed about these issues so we can make smart decisions about our personal finances and careers.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, one intriguing theme that keeps popping up in these online discussions is this skepticism about whether tariffs can actually solve the issues that Trump claims they will.
Yeah, there seems to be a sense that tariffs might be more of a distraction from the deeper underlying issues.
Right, and that they might not actually be effective in achieving their stated goals.
Exactly. Some people are even speculating that there might be ulterior motives behind Trump's push for tariffs.
Like what kind of motives?
Well, some suggest that these tariffs could be a way to benefit certain industries or individuals who have close ties to Trump.
Or that they're meant to create a sense of chaos and instability which could benefit those who thrive in such environments.
Right. But it's important to emphasize that these are just speculations at this point. There's
Right.
no concrete evidence to support those claims.
Of course.
Yeah.
But it does raise questions about the motivations behind these tariffs and whether they truly serve the best interests of the American people.
It reminds us to be critical thinkers and not just accept things at face value.
To question assumptions.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to policies that could have a significant impact on our lives.
Absolutely.
Another interesting point that's been raised in these discussions is this idea of the U.S. becoming more self-sufficient, less reliant on global trade.
The concept of economic nationalism is definitely back in the spotlight. It's a fascinating idea, but one that's not without its challenges.
For example, achieving complete self-sufficiency would require massive investments in domestic infrastructure and manufacturing capabilities.
Right. And it could lead to higher prices for consumers if domestic production can't keep up with demand or if it's simply less efficient than foreign production.
Imagine having to pay twice as much for a smartphone that's only half as good, just because it was made in the U.S.
It's a real possibility. And then there's the question of innovation. Could cutting ourselves off from global trade stifle innovation and limit our access to new technologies and ideas?
That's another concern that I've heard a lot. The free flow of goods, services, and ideas is often seen as a key driver of innovation and economic growth.
Absolutely. So while the idea of self-sufficiency might sound appealing on the surface, it's a complex issue with potential trade-offs that need to be carefully considered.
It's important to remember that we live in a deeply interconnected global economy. Trying to disentangle ourselves from those connections could have unforeseen consequences for both the U.S. and the world.
I agree. It's not a decision to be taken lightly.
So to sum up this part of our deep dive, we've really dug into the potential consequences of these tariffs. the arguments for and against them, and the broader implications for the U.S. economy and global trade.
We've also explored some of the deeper, more philosophical questions surrounding tariffs, their effectiveness, the motivations behind them, and the potential for unintended consequences.
Now, as we head into the final part of this deep dive, I want you to think about this. If these tariffs actually go into effect, how might you need to adapt your own consumer behavior or financial decisions? We'll explore that and other thought-provoking questions in the last installment of our tariff deep dive. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of tariffs. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from the nitty-gritty details of Trump's plan to the potential ripple effects across the economy and the globe.
And now we want to bring it all home and focus on you, the listener. How can you prepare for these potential changes, and what can you do to navigate this complex landscape?
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about tariffs in the abstract, but it's another to think about how they might actually impact our daily lives. So let's get practical. What are some concrete steps people can take to prepare themselves?
Well, if these tariffs do lead to higher prices, as we've discussed, becoming more mindful of your budget and spending habits would be a smart move.
Definitely.
Makes sense. Maybe start thinking about cutting back on non-essential spending or exploring more affordable alternatives to those imported goods that might become more expensive.
Like that fancy imported cheese you love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to discover a hidden gem from a local cheesemaker.
Or maybe finally give that homemade pasta recipe a try.
There you go.
Turn lemons into lemonade, right? And for those of you who are in industries that could be directly affected by these tariffs, what advice would you give?
I'd say it's really important to stay informed about potential job impacts and to start exploring alternative career paths if necessary.
Be proactive.
Exactly. Don't wait for things to happen. Be adaptable. Be proactive. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about the potential consequences of these tariffs, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions about your personal finances and your career.
So it's all about taking control and not just feeling like you're at the mercy of these global forces.
Right.
Now, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, this idea of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
It seems like with any major policy change, there are always going to be those ripple effects that we didn't anticipate.
Oh, absolutely. With complex systems like the global economy, it's incredibly difficult to predict every single outcome.
It's like that butterfly effect, right?
Yeah.
One small change in one part of the world can have massive consequences elsewhere.
Exactly. Think of it like dropping a pebble into a pond. You see that initial splash, but the ripples, they spread out much farther than you might expect.
And some experts are even warning that these tariffs could disrupt global supply chains, leading to shortages of certain products.
And those shortages could further drive up prices, creating even more volatility in the market.
Imagine going to the store, and those shelves that were once full of your favorite products are suddenly empty.
It's a sobering thought.
It is. And what about the potential for geopolitical instability? Could these tariffs escalate tensions with China, Mexico, and Canada? Maybe even leading to unforeseen conflicts or diplomatic standoffs?
It's definitely within the realm of possibility. We've seen throughout history that trade wars can sometimes spiral out of control and lead to larger conflicts.
So these tariffs could really strain those relationships with important allies and trading partners.
They could. It's a reminder that economic policies aren't just about numbers and balance sheets. They have real-world social and political implications as well.
And those implications can be far-reaching and hard to predict. It's like setting off a chain reaction where one thing leads to another, and it's impossible to know for sure where it will all end.
That's the nature of complex systems.
I guess so. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder. Think about all the things you use and rely on every day. Your smartphone, the clothes you wear, the food you eat. How much of that comes from other countries? And how might your life change if those things suddenly became more expensive or harder to get?
It's a really interesting exercise to think about what a world with less globalization might look like. What are the trade-offs we might have to make if tariffs become a more prominent feature of the economic landscape?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's a conversation worth having. And by staying informed, by being engaged, and by being open to different perspectives, we can all contribute to finding the best path forward.
That's the key.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of tariffs. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit empowering.
Keep those questions coming and keep exploring these complex issues that shape our world.
Until next time, stay curious, everyone.